Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia. Welcome to the introduction, and this is the introduction and status update to the general plan update effort. And today is Wednesday, March 24th. My name is Julia Klein. I'm the project manager for the general plan update effort. And with us this evening are several staff members. I'm going to ask everybody to show themselves on video as we introduce them. So Christina Horsberger is our Community Development Director, and she will lead the presentation this evening. With us also on the general plan team are Linda Lee, Associate Planner. She's helping with both the general plan and the housing element update effort. And Brian Alexander, Senior Management Analyst, helping with all things general plan, housing, policy related. Mary Way, Planning Secretary and General Plan Subcommittee Secretary. And Aaron Fellers from our City Clerk's Office and our logistics guru for this evening. So what we're doing this evening is we're going to have a presentation, and there will be also opportunities for questions. I see on the registration that one person, Lori Watanuki, has raised her hand. I wonder if it is a logistical question. If that's the case, Lori, would you go ahead and type in your question in the questions, the Q&A box? Mary, can you check, was Lori's connection disconnected? Oh no, her hand, she put her, okay, great. All right, so we'll go ahead and launch into the presentation. So due to the health orders that are in place at this time, we are holding all public meetings remotely. The purpose of this meeting is informational and no decisions will be made tonight. Following the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions about the general plan update effort and about general plans in general. As I mentioned earlier, we have a large number of registrants this evening. At this time, there are 67 sign up as attendees, and we will do our best to respond to all questions. However, if we are not able to do so within the time that we have, you will be able to access the full list of questions and our responses at our website on strivesanmateo.org. The website itself will be displayed in the presentation later on. We will also be recording this meeting and we'll post the video online in a few days. Now, this is a check for all the attendees who are signed on now. All attendees will have their microphones muted and cameras turned off for this presentation. So please enter any questions that you may have in the question and answer function, and that's at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I will hand it over to Christina.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're happy to be here and happy to see that so many people have signed up for our general plan update effort, recap, and status update. My name is Christina Horsberger. I am the Community Development Department Director for the City of San Mateo. Here in the Community Development Department, we oversee the development of the built environment within the City of San Mateo. So we look at buildings, we look at the infrastructure that supports buildings, and we look at properties, how properties are used, and at the services in the city in a comprehensive and holistic manner in order to take community input and provide the policies and things that put the desires of the community as far as the built environment goes into place. Before we get started tonight, we wanted to ask everyone a question. We wanted to know, is this your first time joining us for a general plan event? I'll give you guys a couple minutes to answer, and we want to use the responses to try to inform the level of detail we go into on some of the slides moving forward. Okay, it looks like it's pretty much down the middle. So we have 55% who say yes, this is the first time, and 45% who have attended one of our events before. So with that in mind, I will try to balance the level of information that's provided here and try not to be redundant, but still be informative. Following the presentation, I think which will be altogether about 30 minutes or so, we should have just under an hour for Q&A. And so you can type your questions into the Q&A, and Linda will be tracking those. And then following the presentation, she will be calling on, reading the questions so that we can respond to them. As Julia mentioned, we'll respond to as many as we can. It's possible that some might require research, so we may need to follow up. And if we do need to do that, we will do so in writing, and all of the questions and all of the responses will be available online along with the recorded video. So for tonight, the first part of the presentation will be an introduction to general plans, San Mateo's general plan, what it is and how it works, and also a status update of the efforts we've made so far as part of the General Plan 2040 update project. We'll talk a little bit about participation, what it means in terms of developing the general plan, and how folks can participate moving forward. And then we'll talk about next steps, in particular, the soonest next steps, which are a series of meetings and workshops. So what is a general plan? A general plan is an overarching document that is required to be in place in any municipality within the state of California. A general plan is basically a book that is composed of different chapters, which for general plans are called elements. Many of the requirements the elements are required, while some are optional and are really intended to be tailored to the needs of a particular jurisdiction. So here in San Mateo, we have land use, circulation, housing, urban design, parks and rec, conservation and open space, safety, and noise elements. Those elements or chapters are populated with information about the community with respect to their topic matters, and they're informed by input from the community that we get during events like what we're going to be embarking on here in the near future. The way that we determine what is reflected is by figuring out what is the vision and what are the values for the community. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide, but I wanted to go ahead and just set that stage for what the general plan is and its purpose. So it is general, it is overarching, it covers a variety of topics, and it should reflect community desires and needs. So with that general plan in place, the city can then look at specific things. So we can look at specific properties, specific neighborhoods. We can look at areas of town that have special needs, and we can look at the types of things that we want to see there, and then we can develop more specific regulations after we have that general plan in place and we know the broad vision. So we do that in a variety of ways. We have specific plans, which are sort of one step down in focus from the general plan. So they provide more specific information on particular areas and more specific requirements. They may have things like height limits or design guidelines or use requirements that don't apply to the city at large, but are really meant to be focused. We also have a zoning code that further implements the general plan. So for the city at large, in areas that are not subject to a specific plan or some other type of special set of circumstances, then the zoning code applies. And what that does, it establishes a more specific level of use requirements in the different districts throughout the city. It contemplates landforms, and so that's where we get things like building heights, we get things like setbacks, what kind of features and amenities need to be on a property, how much open space, how much landscaping, how much paving can there be, how can buildings be used, what are the procedures like that we use to process requests that we get to do things in our built environment. When we look at things like businesses or new development, how many parking spaces are needed. Do the requirements vary from district to district or from parts of town to parts of town? And so with the general plan, that's the overarching document, would say something like, in this area, you can have low density residential land use, whereas the zoning code would say something like, you can have a single family home here, or you can have a duplex. For the next category higher, the general plan might say something like, you can have medium density residential here. And then the zoning code would then put a number on how many units you could have per acre. Units, in this case, is the same thing that people would equate to a dwelling, an apartment, any kind of residential, single residential living space. And so right now we're in the general plan process. General plans usually have a lifespan of about 20 years. Our general plan that we're working on now is intended to provide the roadmap to 2040. And so once we have the general plan in place, which is expected to be done by 2024, then we'll work on the specific plans and the zoning code and everything that goes with that. There are a variety of other tools we use also to implement design guidelines, master plans, and different policies and things. And that will all be an outfall of the general plan once we know what the vision is for the community. So what's been done so far? General Plan 2040 started in 2018. We started doing outreach. During fall and winter of 2018, a vision was developed for the general plan with a lot of community input. Throughout spring and summer of 2019, 10 study areas were established. The study areas represent 10 distinct parts of the community spread throughout the city that were determined to be areas that needed to be studied to see if change was warranted. So we would look at a variety of factors in those study areas, including potential development of properties, areas that are close to transit. Maybe we would be looking at transit-oriented type of developments. There are some areas that need infrastructure improvements. So it could be a variety of things that are looked at, and it really will depend on the neighborhood or the study area that's being looked at. So once the study areas were established, we crafted some draft land use alternatives, again, with a lot of community input. That was done in winter of 2019. We planned a series of outreach events. We had one in March of 2020, I believe, and then the pandemic hit and we went to the shelter in place. And so at that point, we switched gears a little bit, and instead of continuing with our workshops on the land use alternatives, since we weren't able to hold the workshops, we focused our efforts on some of the internal tasks that needed to be done. So we've been doing a lot of administrative things associated with the general plan. So we've still been progressing, but our outfacing component was put on hold for a little while. So that brings us to where we are now. Before we go there though, I just do want to recap real briefly the things that were done, because those will inform how we move forward. So as I mentioned, a vision statement was developed for the general plan with a lot of public outreach. So here's that vision statement for you. San Mateo is a vibrant, livable, diverse, and healthy community that respects the quality of its neighborhoods, fosters a flourishing economy, is committed to equity, and is a leader in environmental sustainability. That vision statement reflects the city's values of diversity, balance, inclusivity, prosperity, and resiliency. I mentioned that we also had crafted draft land use alternatives and had settled upon 10 study areas within the city. Without going into too much detail here in our recap, introduction, and status update, we wanted to at least visually represent to the folks in the audience here tonight the range of the study areas and for you to be able to see where they're located in the city. And so these are maps of the city that represent the 10 study areas. The 10 study areas are the same in all three of these maps that you're looking at. The areas that are in color are the ones that represent the 10 study areas. So you can see that they're concentrated a lot in the central part of the city on a north-south access, but we do have other areas in there that are of import, some of the different neighborhoods in different parts of the city that, as I mentioned earlier, require study for a variety of different reasons. You see different colors in each of these three because these three maps, in addition to showing you the study areas, also show three different potential land use alternatives that are based on different growth scenarios for the city. And so those draft land use alternatives represent land use alternative A, which would account for just under 10,000 new homes, about 33,000 new residents living in San Mateo, and about 15,000 new jobs. Alternative B has 15,820 new homes, almost 40,000 new residents, and still about 15,000 new jobs. And alternative C has almost 21,000 new homes with almost 60,000 new residents, and again, still about 15,000 new jobs. And so to date, those are the things that have been established, the three scenarios, the 10 study areas, as well as the vision. So where we are now is in a place where we need to start looking at the land use alternatives again. So picking up where we left off, we have a series of workshops that are still remaining. Those workshops will be interactive. We'll be asking for a lot of input in those workshops. And before we do that, we want to make sure that we bring everyone in the community who has an interest, and we hope that everyone in the community has an interest, up to date with what we've done so far, that we provide a general overview of what's happening, and that we give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. So instead of going straight back into the workshops that are really working meetings, we wanted to make sure that we had some just general informational meetings. So that's the purpose of our meeting tonight. And that's why we really want to concentrate on our presentation and our Q&A so that you know what we've done, what we're doing, and how you can participate in that process. And so once we have the alternatives finalized, then we will be working to create a preferred scenario. What a scenario would be the output of the community input coming to us, and us using that information to take what we hear about the different land use alternatives and to put the pieces together from what we hear from the community of what's most important, of what we should study, and to cobble that into one preferred scenario that probably at the end of the day will be a combination of some of the components from the different land use alternatives, and maybe things that we haven't thought of yet, but that we hear as we conduct our outreach. With those in place, we can start thinking more about the goals and policies that are in the general plan. The goals are the big overarching objectives, the big things that we want to do in the general plan. Things like promote childcare, promote transit-oriented development, create affordable housing, improve traffic congestion. Things like that are the things that we would talk about, and then there would be policies and also actions that would help to implement those. Once we have all of that drafted, we need to do environmental review. So we need to then look at the plan that we've put together and see the impacts that it's going to have on the community. And we need to study and evaluate those and also present that to the community so everyone has a chance to input, not just on the general plan itself, but also on the potential impacts of the general plan. We also have one element of the general plan, which is required by the state and is required by the state to be updated every 8 years. And so that is called the housing element. That is the element or chapter of the general plan that accounts for where we're going to see residential growth, how much residential growth we're going to see. And it is required by state law. They hand down a regional housing needs allocation. And what that allocation does is it gives a number to each city of how many new residential units they need to make a path forward for. So the city doesn't necessarily need to build units, but we need to have policies in place so folks who want to build residential units can come in and build them. And the state gives us that number. So I mentioned earlier that our general plan is due for completion in 2024. The housing element is due for completion in 2023. January of 2023. So the timelines, they're a little bit lined up, but the housing element is going to be completed sooner. And so they are going to be running somewhat concurrently. You may see informational flyers or different kinds of notices and outreach for both. They are very closely related in many ways. Again, the housing element is part of the general plan, but it does have its own unique circumstances. And so we have some stuff going separate, but they really do need to be considered together. So who gets to participate in our general plan update process? The answer is the entire community. The community is a group of people who share the same things, such as where they live, work, and play. And it's also a place where people solve problems together. So we have lots of folks in San Mateo. We have 104,000 folks who live here, but we have lots of people who work here and lots of people who live in surrounding areas who come here and use parks and use our downtown and drive through. And we want to make sure that we hear from everyone, because we do think that everyone has a voice in how we shape our community. And so our community stakeholders could be our residents, our business owners and operators, property owners, business patrons and service users, folks who develop private property in the city and help create our built environment, everyone who lives, works, and plays here, and representatives of folks who may not always participate for whatever reasons they may have. Accessibility, communication, there's all kinds of reasons, schedules, why people may not always be able to participate, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear what they have to say. And so we do try to be creative and find ways to make sure that everyone is represented with our stakeholders. And that brings me to our second question that we have for everyone. And so we wanted to ask, what kind of stakeholder are you? Are you a resident? Do you work here? Do you own a business? Are you a property owner? Or are you a visitor and patron? Or do you represent some kind of a group? I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to answer, and then I'll move on. Okay, so we have results. 73% are residents, so good, strong resident representation here. We have about a quarter who work in San Mateo, 8% who own a business, 63% who own property. I'm guessing the residents and property owners are one and the same for many of those folks. 17% who are visitors who use San Mateo businesses, and 27% who are representing an organization of some type. So a pretty good array representing a lot of different stakeholders in the community. And so that's encouraging. That's what we like to see. And we like to see a strong resident and property owner presence, as well as all of the other stakeholders. So you all will have a chance to participate. We encourage it. We welcome it, and we hope that you will not only participate yourselves, but also share any information or interest with anyone. Let anyone that you know who you think has an interest know how they can participate and how important their voice is in shaping the future of San Mateo through the general plan update. So we've done a lot of outreach in the past. Our community participation events so far have been comprised of community workshops, public meetings with our general plan subcommittee, our planning commission, and our city council. We've had pop-up events in different locations. We've gone to community events. We've gone to places where people work, places where people recreate, and set up pop-up events where we've tried to get a lot of feedback that way. We've done intercept surveys. We have online exercises. Anyone can contact us anytime, email, call, send a letter. We keep every piece of input that we get, and we track it, and we keep it with our general plan files, so that when it comes time to organize and synthesize our information, we have everything that we've heard so far. We also do outreach to local organizations. We offer to talk at our school districts, some of our local organized groups, homeowners associations, merchants associations. So anyone who wants to hear us, will go talk to you. We also are enlisting the assistance of the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, which is an organization that helps with facilitation and messaging and reaching hard to reach communities. And they've been really integral in helping us with our Spanish speaking community and our youth communities at reaching out and going to the places where people are and sharing information in that way. They're also helping us put together some Spanish speaking community targeted workshops and information that we can distribute that is targeted in that way. We also do outreach to property owners, and again, we'll speak anywhere that they'll listen to us pretty much. And so we have heard a lot so far. As you can see, we had a long list of outreach events that we've conducted so far. We've heard a lot about traffic and congestion and traffic safety. We hear a lot of folks have concern about housing production, and in particular, the production of affordable housing. A lot of folks would like to see transit improvements and sidewalk, crosswalk, and street lighting improvements. Parking is a concern. And we've also heard that folks want a place to gather and that parks are really, really important to people. I'm sure as we move forward through this process, we're going to hear a lot more things, some of which we've identified and some of which we've not heard before. And so we're really looking forward to hearing what folks have to say that we might not have heard yet too. So I mentioned we have a series of workshops coming up. They are virtual workshops at this time. We will try to transition back to in-person as soon as we can. But in March and April, we are starting with our introductions and recaps, and we will start with our scenario building workshop. So this is the first. So this is our, again, general plan intro and recap. We're going to have another meeting just like this Saturday morning. We want it to have one on a weeknight and a weekend day so that everyone who wants to participate has a chance to participate. We're going to be doing the same thing with the housing element. March 30th and I believe April 3rd. I'll have the dates for you in another couple of slides. And so that will be sort of similar to this, getting everyone up to speed with what the housing element is, what it means for San Mateo, how you can participate, what we've done so far, and what's next. Following that, we will have 2 workshops for the land use alternatives. And that's where we're going to be seeking a lot of feedback and a lot of input. And so we're really hoping that these introductory workshops get everyone thinking and get everyone asking questions. If not tonight, then follow up with questions, think about things, and really take a look at your surroundings after these meetings and before the workshops, and think about what you might want to see. We have a website and we have interactive tools on our website. We're going to be posting more. We are currently making quite a few changes. We'll have an interactive map up there where you'll be able to explore the land use alternatives and zoom in and out of the maps and get information on different properties. We have our outreach materials in a variety of languages on our website. And I think that the range of materials and information goes from very simple introductory to quite deep if you start thinking about our interactive tools. So I think there really is something there for everyone. And if there's not something there that you want to see, we'd be happy to hear about that too, because we really do want to make sure that we're catering to the needs of everyone and that everyone has the level of information and the type of information that communicates best to them. and that we are presenting information and asking questions in a way that's productive. And so again, we encourage you to visit the website and to come to our events and to tell people about our events. This is one of our flyers. You may see these around our city. It's the same flyer. We have it in English and Spanish here. This is also on our website. It has the dates, which we'll land on our last slide. But again, we have the meeting tonight. We have one also on Saturday that will be the same as this one. Then we have on March 30th and April 3rd, the housing element introductions. And then the dates for the workshops are April 15th and April 17th. And all of these are one weeknight and one Saturday. So future steps. Once we have determined and evaluated the preferred land use scenario, or I should say once the community has provided input and helped us be able to delineate the preferred land use scenario, we will begin with our technical evaluation. So we'll take that scenario and we'll figure out, what does that mean? What are the impacts of this? What does it mean for San Mateo? So what is the amount of development that can be allowed under the scenario that we settle upon? What does that mean for the overall character? What kind of things should be considered? What does it mean for traffic impacts, for public health, for where people live now or where they can live in the future? We'll look at public services and utilities. We'll look at environmental sustainability. We'll look at impacts on the physical health of the facility, community benefits from different types of developments. And we'll do all that with respect to whatever laws apply to us, the state and federal laws that we need to abide by. So no decisions on the preferred land use scenario will be made until that technical evaluation is completed and shared with the community, and everyone has had a chance to ask questions and vet it, and that it's presented to decision makers first at preliminary meetings where there's time for a lot of input. So the preferred land use scenario that we settle upon first is for study, but nothing gets adopted until those studies are completed. And so I wanted to land here on our slide where we have our dates so that everyone can make sure that they know the dates and times of our upcoming meetings. On the bottom left, www.strivesanmateo.org is our general plan update website. So that is apart from our city website. You can access it from our city website, but it is a standalone website. It's solely for the general plan. There's a lot of information there. As I mentioned, we are in the process right now of updating it and adding more information. And so we hope that you will visit our website. We definitely look forward to seeing you, and we look forward to seeing people use the tools that we're creating. So I just wanted to land on our final two questions. So we do have two more polling questions for you. The first is, we're hoping to hear, and this will help inform our outreach, we're hoping to hear how you heard about this session tonight. And so we tried to get the word out in a variety of ways, and we are wondering what spoke to you most directly. So was it email newsletters? Was it social media? Was it print ads in the Daily Journal? Digital ads in the Daily Journal? Was it in-person outreach, or through neighborhood or community groups, or word of mouth? So I'll give everyone a little bit to answer that. Okay, looks like our newsletters are effective. 65% learned of the event from our email newsletters. Neighborhood or community groups looks like it was second place with 33%, followed by word of mouth, in-person outreach, social media, and then the Daily Journal. So that's good information to have. I appreciate everyone who answered the question. So now that you are aware that the meetings are taking place. We also would like to know what's the best way to keep you informed. And so moving forward, what's the best way to tell you guys about upcoming events? Is it the e-newsletters? I'm thinking maybe that's a good way. Social media, daily journal, in-person outreach, or neighborhood and community groups. Yep, 93% email newsletters, 22% social, oh, and then community groups, 36%, then social media, in-person outreach, print ads, and then digital ads through the daily journal. So that's very good information to have. Thank you everyone for answering that question. We definitely will use this information moving forward. We're also sending out a mailer. So we're sending a mailer to every property owner and occupant in the city of San Mateo. So everyone will be getting something in the mail as well. And then later on, as we progress, we'll be conducting another survey, a statistically significant survey that will reflect input from the community as well. So I wanted to make sure I got that out there so everyone can look out for the mailer and can be aware when the survey comes around a little later in the process. So with that, that concludes the presentation portion of the evening. Linda Lee, our associate planner, has been monitoring the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A, and she will be reading them, and I will answer as many as I can. As I mentioned before, if there's anything that requires research, we will go back and find the answer to the question and post it online with our log of the questions that we received tonight, and we'll also post the questions that we received with the answers that we actually provide tonight. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Linda.
Thanks, Christina. Thank you everyone for sharing your questions and comments in the chat. So I'm gonna ask these questions in the order that they were received. So we'll start with the first one. What about the noise elements of the train horn along the Caltrain train corridor? That's the first question.
So when we look at the noise element, that will be something that is looked at. So again, we have the different chapters that make up the general plan. They all reflect what we hear from the community, and we're going to hear from the community. I'm sure that's going to be one of the things that comes up. So as we move through this process, we will be hearing from folks about what they think about noise, not just that noise, but all kinds of noise. We also hear things about leaf blowers and construction noise and things like that. And so we will use all of that information to inform how we shaped the draft of our noise element, which will then be presented back to the public so that it can be further fine-tuned before it's finalized. Once the noise element is in place, it will have the goals and policies and actions to execute the vision for the noise element. And so that would be reflected in our zoning code. We have a noise ordinance in our zoning code, and it would likely need to be modified to reflect any changes that result to the general plan noise element.
Thanks. Okay, next question from Lori. There are concerns regarding the very high RENA numbers. How does San Mateo plan to handle protecting our historic downtown, reducing cut-through traffic and the loud traffic noise? Other cities have more housing along ECR, I'll assume that stands for El Camino Rio, along the San Trans line. The buses have been empty for decades with very low ridership. This may increase the ridership on San Trans and address the housing imbalance.
So again, I would say, so actually I'm reading it too, so I'll go ahead and take that in order. So we are right now exploring doing a historic survey. We've applied for grant funding to fund that effort. It will be part of the general plan. It's a study that we will conduct either way, whether we get the funding or not, because we know it's important, and it will look at the downtown. And as an outcome of the general plan, once we get to the point where we know what our policies and goals are, we can do things that are more specific, like a specific plan for the downtown that we have, updating design guidelines, things like that, to make sure that the rules that we have in place are reflective of the general plan and of the community's desire to protect historic resources. Traffic and traffic noise, again, those are things that we'll be looking at as we move through the general plan. And so right now, we're trying to figure out what is the plan to handle these things. And before we can do that, we need to hear what the issues are from everybody and what the desired solutions are, or what potential solutions are that maybe we haven't explored yet. So that's what this process is for. And so we have heard a lot about cut through traffic. And that is something that we'll be looking at, that will be part of our land use and circulation elements. You may notice that our study areas are largely along the El Camino Real line. So we do think that there is an opportunity for more housing there. That is typically where you do see it, particularly lately. Transit-oriented development is often geared toward mixed-use projects where housing and services are close together, and they're close together with transit. So our study areas, many of them are along El Camino Real as well, and we'll have to see what that looks like as we move through the process. The same thing with transit. These are all things that we're going to be looking at, including the RENA numbers. So this year, you're right, they are more than twice what they were the past cycle. It's about 7,000 as opposed to about 3,300 before. And we also need to provide a buffer in case some of the units that could be accommodated don't eventually get built. And so that's something that we're looking at right now. We're doing a sites inventory and we're studying that to see what it's going to mean. And as soon as we have information, we will be presenting it. I'm not sure if we'll have it by the housing element workshops that are coming up, but we will make it available as soon as we have answers. Right now, it's very exploratory. We just got the information a couple of months ago. It's very data intensive.
Okay, next question. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the vacancy rate for office space seems to be very high. Do you have the numbers for that? So that's the first question.
Do you want, let's go through the whole thing and then I'll
Okay,
go
let's do that. And there's a second question. Given that, why are we building about 4 city blocks of new office buildings in Bay Meadows? Could these buildings be pivoted and converted to apartment buildings instead? Many companies are not planning to have their teams return to working in the offices full time, which means even after the pandemic, the amount of office space needed by companies will be significantly reduced.
So the answer to the first question is no. Offhand, I do not have the vacancy rate for office buildings, but that's something that we can look into and see if we can get that information and post it. In terms of the 4 city blocks for new office buildings in Bay Meadows, I want to just touch back on something that I mentioned before. I mentioned it in the context of housing, but it really is true in general. The city develops policies and codes and rules and permit procedures and things like that for development, including the development of housing and office spaces. We're not generally the builders of that development. We're not generally the developers ourselves. So when we have a development proposal come in, we're obligated to process that request, to look at the application we get. For instance, like something for Bay Meadows, where they're proposing to do something. And if they're proposing to do something and it's in alignment with the rules and the goals and the policies that are in place at the time when it's up for entitlement, then oftentimes those developments will get approved. That's what happened with Bay Meadows quite some time ago, and it was a phased project. And so it's been coming through in phases over several years. And so even though there are some things you may just be seeing now, those plans were put in place a long time ago. To speak to office buildings, we have had a large interest in office buildings still. We're still in the pandemic. We're not quite out of it yet, but so far we haven't seen any kind of slowdown in interest or inactivity. And so we're kind of waiting to see what happens with that. We definitely would not be able to tell someone who wants to build offices, no, don't build offices, build apartments. But what we can do is monitor and pay attention to the needs of the community and the city, and make sure that when we get inquiries, that our responses are reflective to that. And so I think in terms of the response to the pandemic, we're not quite there yet. So we're still waiting to see. So far, in our capacity, we haven't seen any real slowdown just yet.
Next question. It seems like it takes us 4 to 5 years to make a general plan, which is supposed to be in place for 20 years. But in actuality, our last general plan was completed about 35 years ago. What are we going to do to move faster? And has anyone thought that perhaps the general plan needs to be more fluid? For example, a living document being updated ongoing. As an example, the COVID pandemic has broadly changed the number of people coming into San Mateo to work. And if we had published a general plan last year, it would be considered outdated.
So that is correct. A general plan is a lengthy process, and I think you would find in general, in most municipalities, it is a several-year effort. It's a big document. It takes a lot of outreach and a lot of work. And in order to make sure that we're thoughtful and that we hear from everyone and that we try to reach everyone and that we take the information that we get and really try to understand it and reflect it in the document, that does take some time. We also have the environmental review component, which takes time and is governed largely by state law. And so we recognize that it's a lengthy process, but we think that it makes sense to be patient with it so that we do it right, because it is supposed to be in place for 20 years. They often do last longer because it does take a long time to update them, even when you start early. And so I definitely understand the point of the question, but I just want to make sure that I convey that we do need to have some caution when we think about the speed at which we move through this process, because the quality of our dialogues and communications here, I think, is really super important. In terms of making a general plan more of a fluid document, it's not that easy to change the general plan. And so when you make an amendment to the general plan, there's certain circumstances in which you can do that. You can't just do it to any, to respond to any need. And any time that we do make a change to the general plan, there's a process that it has to go to, whether it's a small change or a big change. A big change would take longer because there'd be more discussion and outreach that was needed. But even for little changes, they still need to go through that same process. And so we're limited to only doing certain types of general plan amendments and certain numbers of them over time. And so we try to be careful with when and how we do that, because we do want to make sure that since it is a general and long range document, that we're not reacting to short-term considerations for this 20-year plan.
Next question. Several years ago, I participated in some downtown development workshops focused on making our downtown more livable, walkable. There was discussion of creating pedestrian promenades. What happened with that? When will it be implemented?
This is Julia Klein. I can speak to that. I was also project manager for that. That started in 2017. Once we started some of the community dialogue, we were hearing a lot of comments from the community that they would like to include discussions about building height, density, and those had to do with the Measure P. So with those discussions, what we were hearing is, we wanted to talk about them as a community for downtown, but because these sort of density, height, and floor area are citywide, we pivoted based on community comment to then initiate a general plan update discussion so that we could have a community-wide discussion looking at how different parts of the city are affected, by Measure P, and then that led to some of the work that has been done by residents in the Measure Y initiative, and so that went to the voters in November. The input that we got during the downtown plan update effort have been included and incorporated by the consultant team and the staff that's been working on the general plan. And so when you're looking at some of the information that we'll be sharing at the upcoming Imagining Scenarios for San Mateo's Future, those information and the input have been incorporated into developing those draft range of alternatives. All of those community comments are still with the city. We have records of them, and the general plan team, the consultant team is aware of those. And so we're going to be making sure that we include those comments.
I would just piggyback off of Julia's response. I see that there's an interest here, particularly in the pedestrian promenade. And I would just point out that we are piloting one now on B Street. And so we are starting on the early stages of that. And once we see how it goes, we can evaluate and see where else we might be able to do that, if that's going to be something permanent, which it may very well be. There's a lot of considerations that we need to look at when we think about stuff like that. Circulation, flow of traffic, where are folks going to park, what kind of physical changes may or may not need to be made in the areas where we place pedestrian promenades. So it is something that we are actively working on, and that is in the early stages.
Next question. Now that many businesses like Oracle and HP are moving to other states, is it possible to reduce the housing allocations given by the state by 30%? Also, our downtown is a historical area and buildings. Could we opt to not add more housing?
So the state gives us the number based on what they envision to be the housing needs for the region, and then they have a methodology that they use to break it up per jurisdiction. They're looking at where jobs can be, not necessarily the movement of individual businesses. So the methodology has already advanced through several stages in the housing element, and the RHNA numbers have generally been established. We've been asked a lot about that, and a lot about if it's possible to challenge the RHNA numbers. We do have a FAQs on our housing element website, on our city website. So at cityofsanmateo.org, if you follow the links through community development, housing, and to the housing element, you'll land there. And what you'll see in one of those questions is that challenges to the RHNA numbers are very difficult. And when jurisdictions are successful, it generally has to do with something like a geographic or a logistical factor, like the state made a mistake in calculating the area, not realizing that part of it was a wetland or something like that. So that's just an example of something it could be, but it's usually something that is a practical logistical constraint. They're not really looking at things like which businesses or which buildings are occupied by businesses and can employ people. Also, I think we're fairly far along in that process where we're not going to be in a position to challenge that at this point in time, or I would say maybe not as likely to be successful in challenging something like that if we were to do that. And so, unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of wiggle room for those numbers at this point in time.
Next question. How do ballot measures Y and R that we voted on in November 2020 relate to the general plan?
So that's something that we're looking at right now. We have a lot of analysis to do with respect to how Measure Y is going to impact the general plan. And so there's language in the measure that will require us to amend some parts of the general plan. We're studying now to try to figure out which parts of the general plan we need to change to respond to that. We're also keeping Measure Y in mind as we look at the housing element and the different aspects of the general plan land use categories. We're still doing our sites inventory for our housing element, so we're not exactly sure how everything is going to pan out yet. I think in the next several weeks, we're going to have a lot more information. We're doing a lot of data crunching right now. And so Measure Y is going to spur some changes in the near term to the general plan to get the general plan in full compliance with Measure Y. We need to figure out exactly what those are, and then we need to figure out how the implications of Measure Y factor in as we move through the different elements of the general plan. And so we're not exactly sure yet, but we're interested to see, and we will keep you informed as soon as we know. One other thing, this is maybe a good time to point out, is we do intend moving forward to bring quarterly updates to the city council. So whereas before we would bring updates or information as changes occurred, our plan moving forward is to bring quarterly updates regardless, so that everyone has a chance to hear where we are and what's going on, including the city council, at a city council meeting where everyone has a chance to comment and participate, even if it happens to be in a time when maybe there's not a lot going on. So that would be in addition to any meetings we needed to have for actions that were related to the process.
So next question, define affordable housing and what are the threshold qualifications to be able to be a part of that group? And if this is, more technical and you prefer staff to follow up on that, we'd be happy to. Christina.
I think so. The definition is a little technical because it has to do with a income index here in the Bay Area. I don't know, Julia, if you have the exact answer to that. I would hate to get it wrong because it's technical. The way to become part of that group is to fall into one of the income categories. And so we can get you some information on what those income categories are. There's it's not based on income, it's based on the market rate of the cost of the housing. So we have a below market rate housing program, and you have low, very low, and medium. And so there's different ranges of affordability that are available. And depending on what your income is, that would designate where you would fall within that group. So I think we can follow up with more technical information in the Q&A that we post online. Julia, I don't know if you have anything to add for now.
We do have some information available on the city's website regarding those different categories and folks that are interested in signing up to be on a wait list. I would recommend, given that there's no contact information through this forum, if you're interested in getting more details, please go ahead and email generalplan@cityofsanmateo.org. That way we have your contact information and we can follow up with you.
And I believe on our regular, just our main housing website, we did not too long ago, update it to reflect a definition of what affordable housing is and how someone could qualify. So if you haven't been on our website in a while, you may find it has a little more information now than it may have in the past.
Okay, next question. Can you share total participation numbers for today's session to help understand the representation here and how much more outreach is needed? And there is also a second question at the end that relates to this. I'm going to throw it in. How are you directly outreaching to our residents who rent and who may not be familiar with city governance for their input?
So tonight we had 118 registrants for our event. It looks like we have 65 in attendance. And so in terms of representation, I think the polling questions we conducted earlier showed that we have a large number of residents and property owners that are in attendance tonight. The way that we get our information out is a variety of ways. And so actually, I don't see the second part to the question. So anyway, how much more is needed? A lot. So we're going to have a lot more meetings, and we're very early in the process. So we have a lot more work to do, and we're going to have a lot more outreach, a lot more meetings. And as I mentioned before, we're going to want as many folks to participate as are interested in participating.
Oh, I'll repeat the second question. It was buried at the bottom, but it was related to outreach. So how are we reaching residents who rent and may not be familiar with city governance for their input?
Right. And so we're definitely targeting everyone. We're doing a mailer to every household, every business in San Mateo and every property owner. And so if we have a property where someone rents, like an apartment building, everyone in the apartment building is going to get a glossy 4-page informational packet that's going to have a lot of the information that you guys are getting here tonight. Any renter who lives in a house that they don't happen to own is also going to get that mailer. We're also going to send it to property owners in case they have property in the city and they don't live in the city. So everyone is going to get something physical that they can handle, that they can read, and that they can refer back to for information and for the dates of meetings. So that's one thing that we're doing to target all community members, including the community members who may rent. In terms of reaching folks who may not typically be involved in local government, we're doing a variety of things. I mentioned earlier, we reached out to some different organizations. That includes the school districts. We're looking at contacting possibly the PTA groups, or doing that through the school districts. We are doing targeted outreach with the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center. I mentioned we're going to doing pop-ups at different places, or at least we had been. Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, they're not doing pop-ups, but they still are going to the places where people are. And so they go to places where people meet. I know they've gone to the Workers Resource Center. I know they go to soup kitchens. They go to places like the COVID testing centers. They were going to the vaccination centers. So they're really targeting all kinds of members of the community. We have informational flyers with our dates and with general recap information that we've been handing out. Part of the purpose of our questions earlier about how you heard about this meeting and what's the best way to contact you is another way that we're doing that. And just to go back to the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center a little bit, they also are helping us, as I mentioned, with a Spanish speaking workshop. And they have let us know that certain communities want us to go to them. And so we really are trying to make sure that we do that and that we listen to what we hear in that capacity. And when we do our other meetings, we're listening really closely at how people are saying they want to be informed and trying to hear what the points of interest are. And then I can just share anecdotally, just from my own experience, I have friends who live in San Mateo who I think may be the people that we want to target. And I'm asking them, what would get you interested? You know, you don't participate. Do you know what's going on? If not, why not? Do you want to know? And what would pique your interest? And so I think that as we move through the community and as we talk to people, at least for staff and for anyone who's interested, I think just bringing up the conversation and asking those kinds of questions so that we can then target the information that we give and the questions that we ask, and so that we can know where to go and how to do our outreach. And so we are tackling that in a variety of ways. I think I mentioned also earlier, we will be conducting a community survey moving forward. And so that's another way that we're going to try to target everybody. And so right now, we hear a lot from folks who are active and who know what's going on. And then we hear from folks who are new, who have historically maybe not had as much of a voice, but there is a large part of the community that we don't hear from for whatever reason or another. You know, people are busy. And so those are the people we're also trying to reach. And we're open to hear any other suggestions about what we can do to get better at that and to target that better, because that's our goal.
Next question, what about concerns for climate change and how this will affect our greenhouse gas emissions and use of water?
So that is one of the elements in the general plan. It's something that we have to study, that we want to study, and that will be updated. And so we will be looking at that. We'll have technical studies, and it'll be based on what the vision is for the community, how our land use scenario pans out, because that'll tell us what growth is going to look like and where it's going to occur. And then we can see how that all factors in. We also have a conservation element, which will look at things like water and different natural resources here, open space, parks, things like that. And so all of that will be looked at as part of the general plan update.
Next question, when will council advise their constituents how much weight they give to those participating in this process? How much weight do resident voices have over those working here or developers, for example? I think residents would like to know this from every council member. Thank you.
So I would not answer questions for the council. I would definitely defer those types of questions to the city council. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I can tell you that for our part, for the staff's part of what we're doing, is we are tracking all of the input we're receiving. We are looking at how many participants we have at each event. We're looking at who those participants are. You may have noticed from the questions we posted earlier. We're trying to figure out not only how many people are participating, but who those people are. And so we will be identifying that as we move through the process. As I mentioned earlier, all stakeholders do have input. We want to be transparent in who those stakeholders are. And so right now we're looking at ways to represent that information in a way that presents a comprehensive and holistic depiction of what we're hearing from the public. And that also has transparency in who we're hearing from. And so in terms of weighting, that's something that we've not gotten into yet here from staff level. We have heard that a little bit from the community. I haven't heard that from other avenues yet. And so if that's something that comes up in our further discussions, then that's something that we would look at more closely. But for the time being, we're just trying to be really clear, really transparent, and really fastidious at how we track and categorize and represent the information and the input that we're getting and how we channel that back out.
Next question, why are developers stakeholders in this process? Don't we choose who we hire for development?
So developers are stakeholders because they come in to our city and they submit applications to develop things, and we have to decide upon those. They have interests in different things depending on what they're building. They have an interest in our codes. They have an interest in our policies because our codes and policies help to inform them of whether or not they want to do business here in our city. Do they want to build here or don't they? Is it really hard to build here? Is it really expensive to build here? If it is and it's prohibitive, are they going to go to the neighboring city? Is that okay? Isn't it okay? I mean, that's really something that will be an output of policy decisions made in any city. And so they have a voice because they have a stake. They build all kinds of things. A lot of times we think of some of the larger developments that we see that are more prominently located, but there's developers of all sorts that work here, and some of them are small businesses that want to come in and build or redevelop on a small lot. Some of them maybe the Concars or the Bay Meadows where we have large scale development. And so we don't choose who we hire to development. Developers are generally their own private businesses who have an interest in building something on a piece of land, and we regulate how things get built and developed on those pieces of land. So they come to us with an application. We're not hiring them. They're paying us to process their request. They're paying us only what it takes for us to process their request. And so basically they pay staff to process their application. And so there is no, there's no hiring between the city or the developer when it comes to land development. It is strictly it's a permit applicant and permit approver procedure. And so sometimes staff might be involved in the decision making for really small things, but generally the larger things are going to go to decision makers at the planning commission and city council level. And so again, no hiring, but they're stakeholders because they do have an interest in how we shape our community because they do business here.
Next question. In this presentation, it was noted that some of the ideas may not be used. The last 2 years with the development of Wendy building and the Mid-Penn affordable housing / municipal garage, it seems the city does what it feels is good for the city without the citizens' suggestions. I think that's what they meant to ask.
So I'm not sure that I see a question here, but I would sort of go back to the last question, which is that developers come in and they submit applications, and we look at those with respect to our policies and codes that we have in place. We do have a public process. Both of these projects have gone through that public process, and that is in place so that we do hear from the community and we do hear input, and that the decision makers can consider that when they move forward and when they make a decision. And so both of those projects did go through that process.
So I think this next question is actually a comment. Very glad to hear that those who work in San Mateo but cannot afford to live here due to the high rents and exclusionary housing policies like Measure Y will have an equal voice in the process. So that's a comment. And the next question, if more people are not commuting, don't we need less housing?
I mean, that's a theoretical question, but how it pans out on the ground can vary a lot depending on the situation. It depends where they're not commuting to and from, where are the jobs located, where do people live. The need for less housing, again, we're not determining the need here in San Mateo. The state is telling us what the housing needs are. And so that's what we can respond to. So I guess theoretically, if that's a theoretical question, sure. But I think there's many ways to look at it and many factors that have to be taken into consideration. And a lot of them have to do with the where aspects of where things are located and where people live, where they access goods and services. And again, I think I'm not sure, and I don't want to read something into the question that's not there, but I do understand that there's less commuting now because of the current public health situation. I don't know if that will be long term, so we'll have to wait and see.
Next question. A few years ago, I participated in a park and rec improvement plan that had been in development stages for years. Millions of dollars were to be spent upgrading existing facilities and building new rec facilities in Bay Meadows. Not sure of the status and if any portion of this falls under the general plan.
You're talking about the Parks and Recreation Facilities report is the one that I believe was initiated by the Parks Department to analyze and plan for park facility improvement projects in the future. We have been in conversation with Parks Department, and they are part of the department team that's working on this. And there is, as Christina mentioned, there is an element within the general plan covering open space, parks, and facilities are part of that. So it is included as part of the general plan discussions, and further policy analysis will come in the future.
And so I want to take just a second to let everyone know we've got about 15 minutes left, and I think we have 16 questions. So I will try to be brief, and I'll ask Linda if you see one that appears to be perhaps a duplicate from one before, maybe we can save that for the later part. If we have time, go back.
Okay. So the next question, how do you incorporate data such public reports with the numbers of childcare spaces needed in San Mateo or business survey information into the general plan?
So we track it, we collect it, we synthesize it, and when we start drafting and changing policies after we've done that tracking, synthesizing, and categorizing, we use it to inform what we put in the draft. And so we take input that comes from community members, but we also take technical studies. There's a lot of technical studies that are involved in the general plan, and a lot of data. And this is a data and technical study driven effort in many, many ways. And so community input is one part of it, but that's also another part. And so we consider it all as we move through.
So next question, the definition of a general plan on the city and the state website comprises much more than just housing. It's also about open space, schools, and more. Why are specific study areas chosen instead of studying the whole city? This seems like a specific plan.
So we do have a variety of elements. So it is, we are studying more than just housing. As I mentioned in the one of the early slides, there are 8 elements in the general plan here. And so one of them is parks and open space. One of them is housing. One of them is infrastructure. One of them is safety. And so there are different things that we are looking at holistically. As the last question we got reflected, there's a lot of technical information, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of studies that have to go into informing the general plan and how it's shaped and drafted. There's a lot of land in the city. And so what we did very early on was to determine the study areas based on the input we got and identifying the areas that seemed to be in the most need of the most immediate study for changes, and that could potentially accommodate growth or that needed different kinds of changes. And also we tried to concentrate them around the transit-oriented development areas where there was more opportunities for things to change. So the study areas, I would say, are sort of the low-hanging fruit in the city, the areas that are a little easier to study and that we know are ripe for some kind of change, whereas to study the entire city at the same type of fine level of detail that we need to study these areas for the general plan, I think would be a very daunting task and would add a lot of time to the schedule, and it may not be the best use of our resources when we know that there's other areas that we can identify to concentrate on first. And so it's not that we can't look at the other areas if needed, but we're starting here because these have been identified as areas that that are ripe to be studied for change.
There was another question related to the study areas, but I answered it through the chat. I just wanted to mention that any questions about the study areas, we do have a workshop next month, Imagining Scenarios for San Mateo's Future. So we can go into further detail regarding the study areas then. Okay. So next question, can we encourage the state to develop a rail solution across the San Mateo Bridge, connecting San Mateo, Caltrain, and Bart?
I think that as a constituent, you can always, ask for things like that. That's not really something that we would do as part of the general plan, but in terms of reflecting a community desire to have this type of facility, if that's the input that we're getting, then it wouldn't go to the general plan because we don't have control over the San Mateo Bridge, but it doesn't mean that the need for additional transit couldn't be reflected in our local policies. And so I think they're two separate issues. The question is for something very, very specific that's outside of our jurisdiction, but in terms of wanting more transit options in general, if we hear that, and we have been hearing that, then that will be reflected in the general plan.
Next question. So this is regarding adverse impacts on water, sewage, electrical grid, utilities, school, police, and fire versus the amount of development. Can our existing infrastructure support? If not, who will pay for the upgrades? Developers? Question.
So this is what we're looking at. This is exactly what we're looking at in the general plan. We're looking at how all of our infrastructure, how it's going to support our land use and the different development scenarios and what that's going to mean for the city. In terms of who pays for those things, there's different pots of money that pay for those. So developers do pay for parts of that when there is a nexus to the development, and nexus means a clear connection that this development has this impact associated with it. And so therefore that development would have to provide some of the funds that we would use to address that. But there's all kinds of things that are done with public funds as well, all kinds of street improvements and things like that. And so it really depends what it is. Yeah, so the the question or the answer is it really does depend, but we do that in a variety of ways, and we will study all of that.
Next question, what is the residential apartment vacancy rate?
I do not know, but we can get that answer for you and post it.
Okay. Next questions, it's also regarding RENA. What are the implications of failing it?
So if we were to not comply with our RENA obligations, we could be, it puts us at risk for a few things. So the state recently has, before they didn't really go after cities, I think, too hard who didn't meet their RENA numbers. But I know more recently, they have come down a little harder on cities, or a city, I think, who did not meet its RENA number. And so there's a potential for penalties from the state housing department, but I think more sort of feet on the ground type of concern would be that if you don't have a certified housing element, it makes you ineligible for all kinds of things that come with that, like grant funding opportunities. When we apply for grants for all kinds of different things, like our historical assessment, like some of our roads improvements, like some of our street safety improvements, for different studies that we need to do, a lot of them are dependent on us having a certified housing element. And if we don't have a certified housing element, then we become ineligible for funds that helps to make our public improvements possible. Another implication is that if we have policies in place that could obstruct the production of housing, then we could be subject to litigation if we don't have a certified housing element and we have someone who wants to come in and create housing, and because of our policies, they can't. And so when we're out of compliance with the state RENA numbers, it does have implications and it does have ripple effects to other things that we do and that allow us to operate.
So next question, I'm going to abbreviate it, but the ask is, you know, how or whether the city can encourage developers to switch from office-based buildings to housing, whether that be through incentives, rezoning, or showing them, you know, data around declining office footprints.
So I would say that whenever we have prospective developments, it usually starts off with a conversation about what the prospective applicant wants to do, and then, you know, staff or whoever it happens to be that they're talking to, sometimes it's us, sometimes it's other city officials, and we talk about the visions for the sites or what we think you know, is suitable for the site. We use our policies and our codes to do that, but we also use what we're hearing to do that. And so that is part of our conversation, is what we think is going to be a good fit for a particular area. That said, when we're talking about developers, like large scale housing or office developers or retail developers or whatever they happen to be, they usually have a market that they cater to. They have a type of business operation or a business model. And so you're not really going to get a developer of affordable housing that you're going to say, oh, but office would be here. And so they've changed to office, and vice versa. You're not going to get a developer who builds offices typically who's going to want to come in and switch to housing. And so we do try to have those holistic conversations, and we do try to look at the big picture, and we convey that to prospective applicants when they come in. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to apply to do something, they can apply, and we need to process that request. And so I would also just point out again that so far we haven't seen a change in the activity for office buildings and new office spaces.
So I think there's maybe time for one or two more, Christina.
Okay.
So this question, will the general plan address the infrastructure updates or funding to eliminate properties that are currently in the FEMA designated flood zone?
And so I think I may need to follow up on that question a little bit too. That one also involves our Public Works Department, and we don't have their staff here tonight. So I would hate to misspeak on something that involves them. I know they are updating the levy, and that will protect many of the properties within San Mateo. I believe that there is an amount or a number of houses or properties that would not fall within that. And depending on what we hear through the general plan process, that may or may not change. But again, I would like to follow up with that after being able to talk to Public Works.
Okay, so this will be our last question. It's 7:27. This one relates to outreach. Would you be willing to speak to our Sunny Brae Neighborhood Association to give an overview of the process so that we can encourage more neighbors to get involved in the process?
Yes. Please contact me.
So I think there is room for this last comment. It was asking the team to post this on the city's YouTube channel. So if we can confirm that.
Yes,
I
that will
think-
be posted.
Okay.
It'll take a
And-
few days just logistically, but it will get posted.
Okay, unfortunately, I think we have to end the Q&A for time.
How
But
many
we
more do we have, just out of curiosity?
We have about seven more.
Okay.
Would you like to go through them or close with?
I'm just trying to see if there's any short ones. How are the stakeholders determined by the city? We haven't really defined them. That was just an example of the type of stakeholders that exist in any location. And I would say that that's just a general kind of sampling of stakeholders. It doesn't vary too much from city to city. And so I would say that was sort of a typical kind of list of the types of stakeholders you would see in a community, not specific to just San Mateo.
There's one last question. I think most of the other questions here will take some research, and we can provide a written response and post it online. And that goes to the last comment or the last question here. We are trying to be transparent. Any questions that we get, we will provide a written response to and post it on the Strive San Mateo website so that other community members can also see and be informed.
Yeah, so we'll be doing that centrally so everyone has access to it and everyone can see everything all in the same place. Okay, well, again, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm glad that we had so many people and I hope it was informative and helpful. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we will get them all posted. We're going to do the same thing on Saturday. So if you think of more questions and you want to join us again, feel free to do so. If you're one of the folks who didn't have your question answered tonight and you prefer to log on again and have us talk about it Saturday, we can do that too. We'll have a little time between now and then to look up some of the answers on the ones that required a little more research. And so I know I can't actually see all of you, but I hope to see you at our upcoming events and workshops. Again, look out for the mailers, look out for the survey, look out for the flyers. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can reach us through our city website. You can reach us through our Strive website. We have information on the general plan. We have information on the housing element. We're updating this stuff all the time. We're going to be bringing quarterly updates to council. I believe the next one is planned tentatively for the first council meeting in May. And so I just got a request to go to a homeowners association. I'm happy to do that. Again, anything you need, please let us know and we will do our best to accommodate. And with that, I hope everyone has a great evening.